Okay, we're going to be starting up in just a second. Just if I can take 1 second, Marshall. Can you see my screen? Does it show a PowerPoint slide deck?
You
Is
bet,
my
Ted.
voice coming across okay?
Looks good. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody today. So you're back for the second day of our free Power BI training. Today we're going to concentrate on looking at Power BI Desktop. So our course consists of 3 different presentations. Yesterday was Introduction to the Power BI Service. Maybe just a quick call out to Alpaca Joe. Everybody enjoyed watching him advance as he got his $1 million so he could run for president of the United States. Remember, just a fictitious scenario, nothing real about it, nothing to be angry about. Next thing is we're going to look today at creating Power BI solutions using Power Query and Power Pivot, and that's basically the same thing as Power BI Desktop because that's the application Microsoft has given us to leverage the Power Query and Power Pivot features. And once again, tomorrow we're going to talk about creating and deploying dashboards in Power BI. Okay, so one more call out. If you enjoy this 3-day free training and you want to have more in-depth training, instructor-led training with an instructor there to help you through the Media Lab exercises, once again, we have a PBI 365 data analytics and reporting with Power BI. Definitely something worth considering. Okay, let's jump into our program today. So we're going to begin by talking about the business intelligence project lifecycle and how Power BI Desktop fits in. We'll get up and running with Power BI Desktop. We got to download it. It's a one-click application that we download from the Power BI service site. And then we're going to get into the meat of creating a BI solution by using Power Query to import our data. And once we've imported the data, then we can continue to use Power Pivot to model the data to put it into a better shape for doing our reporting and dashboarding needs on top of that. At the very end, we'll talk about publishing Power BI desktop projects to the Power BI service. And basically, if you don't do that, you don't get the fruit of all your labor. Okay, now let's start just by talking about a typical custom BI project. You know, whether you're doing something quick with Power BI or you're using you know, something like the Ralph Kimball methodology and going the whole 9 yards with a multi-dimensional database in a data warehouse, or you're just doing something with Excel, well, all BI projects typically follow this same set of steps. Well, the first one is figure out where your data lives. Sometimes you're lucky and all your data that you need lives in a single SQL database, you know, what I call a transactional database or an operational database. But quite often, all the data doesn't live inside there. For instance, you might have customers, and that database tells you what state each customer is in. But in your company, you like to look at particular sales regions. And so every state is assigned a sales region, so you might need additional support tables. While you could put them in your operational database, quite often we put them in things like Excel or some other data source. So after discovering where your data is, the next step is to pull the data, extract it from where it lives, load it into a data model, but perform transforms along the way. Now, in the past, we basically used SQL Server integration services and its support in Visual Studio to do this, but that really put the bar very high as far as, you know, who could participate in this particular phase. So Power Query is making great inroads as far as making ETL operations available just to business users, you know, who don't have to be technical or, you know, be experienced at a professional developer level. Well, the next phase is to model the data and to create a data set. And as we model the data, we're basically just reshaping the data to make it better suited for analytics and reporting. Okay, next step is once we've got our data model in shape, well, then we start creating reports that sit on top of this. Then after that, quite often a BI technology supports some type of a dashboard paradigm. So then we can take what's in the reports and consolidate that information or those visuals into one or more dashboards. Next, we package up the artifacts of our project and we deploy them to the production environment. Okay, so with all these particular phases, what are the phases that we get help from Power BI Desktop. So if we look at all these different phases right here, what's really important to see is that Power BI Desktop helps with some but not all these phases. Well, it can't tell you where to look for your data. You're going to have to know where your data is, whether it's a SQL database, whether it's an Excel workbook. You're going to have to be able to find the data. You're going to have to be able to supply authentication information. But once we do that, what Power Query within Power BI Desktop is going to do is help you extract the data, load it, and transform it. Okay, then we have our data modeling and our designing of reports that also is going to be something that we can do in Power BI Desktop. Now, currently, Power BI Desktop allows you to create reports, but it has no support for creating dashboards. What that means is generally you import the data with Power Query, you model it with Power Pivot, you design your reports, then you publish all the artifacts up to the Power BI service, but then you go into the browser and you basically create the dashboards from the reports that you've created inside there. And then the final step, deploying dashboards, once again, we're probably just going to do through the browser because that's all that's currently supported right now. And we'll talk about that tomorrow with organizational content packs. Okay, now when I want to get started with Power BI Desktop, well, we need this application. Now, the application is free. If I go ahead and I move over to the Power BI service right now, and there is this little download tab right here. And so if I download Power BI Desktop, the application flows across the network and automatically installs in your machine. Probably takes about 15 to 30 seconds, and then you're up and running. And so let me go ahead. I've already downloaded and installed Power BI Desktop. The latest version was released about the middle of December. The version before that in November. The version before that in October. So there's a very fast pace at which they're releasing different versions of this tool. And so, one of the things that you're going to see is if you let it go for 2 or 3 months, you come back, there's going to be a whole bunch of new capabilities, in Power BI Desktop. Okay, now once we get Power BI Desktop up and running, so then we have to kind of get used to this user interface. And what you'll see is that there is a navigation menu or a navigation bar over on the left-hand side that allows you to switch back and forth between report view, data view, and relationship view. And as I do the demos, you're going to see me going back and forth between these. Now, also note that this navigation doesn't have a Power Query view. Instead, when you're using Power Query, you're basically doing something like my first demo. I'm going to do a get data command, and that's going to bring up a separate window. And then also, if I want to edit existing queries, while they're part of my particular project, I click on Edit Queries, and it brings up this separate window. Okay, now when I'm in Data View, that's your data modeling or your Power Pivot view. And so you look over to the right, you see a fields list. That shows you the tables that are inside of your data model, and it shows the fields inside of each table, which could just be standard columns. They could also be calculated columns as well as measures, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next section. Okay, now in addition to data view, we also have relationship view. So as you are importing tables with Power Query and they get dumped into the data model, if you want a quick view of the tables that are inside of the data model, relationship view gives you that. As its name implies, relationship view also allows you to see, create, modify, and delete relationships between the different tables that are inside there. Now, after I do a little data modeling, well, then it's time for me to create reports. So there is a report view, and note that when you see the tables in the fields list in report view, it's different because you are a dataset consumer, not a dataset author. And if you drop back down to data mode, all of a sudden, as you look at the tables, you're allowed to extend the tables. You'll find that report view inside of Power BI Desktop is very, very similar, not absolutely identical, but very, very similar to working with the report editor in the browser up in the Power BI service. Okay, now you'll also find that when we work with Power BI Desktop, we have different projects. So I've started up Power BI Desktop. Let's say before I do anything, I'll go ahead and do a save as. And so what you're going to see here is that our projects get saved as this special zip archive, which is a PBIX or a Power BI transfer file. Now let's call this something like Wingtip Sales 2012, and we'll go ahead and we'll save this particular project. And now everything I do as far as creating queries with Power Query and importing data and creating a data model that has relationships and calculated columns and creating reports, all that stuff gets saved into this underlying PBIX file. And when I'm done with my project, I can either take the PBIX file and publish it with Power BI Desktop, which is basically going to take all the artifacts that I've created and push them into the Power BI service, or I can just take the PBIX file and upload it to something like my OneDrive for Business site and then import that, without needing to have Power BI Desktop involved. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But now let's go ahead, and now that we've gotten up and running with Power BI Desktop, let's get into the meat of starting to use Power Query and Power Pivot. Okay, so first thing to recognize is that Power Query is an extract, transform, load, or what often BI specialists call the ETL tool. So we want to extract the data from wherever it's living, whether it's a SQL Server database or an Excel workbook, or in my demo, the first demo, I'm going to use a CSV file. We basically get the data, we pull it in with Power Query, and we load it into the data set. But what's really neat is that you can perform all kinds of transforms. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to replace values. We're basically going to substitute, one value for another as part of the transform process. I can also do things like merge two tables together and basically have the output be a single table into the data model, if that makes the most sense for how I'm modeling my BI project. Now, as far as what are the different types of data that you can pull in, well, it's a very large array. So if we have files, and the most popular types of files are CSV files and Excel workbooks. If you have an Excel workbook, Power Query supports pulling data in just from tables inside of your worksheets and also from data inside the data model that you've added inside. Okay, obviously online transaction processing or operational databases are another important one. If you have OLAP style databases, for instance, if you're working with SQL Server analysis services and you either have multi-dimensional databases with cubes or you have tabular databases, you can pull in that data. Now, a huge step forward for Microsoft is to give us support for the SaaS style application, software as a service. So what are examples of this? Well, things like QuickBooks, things such as Salesforce, GitHub, Facebook, the list goes on. So there's all these different applications out there on the internet that we use, and many of them make their data available, and so Power BI is able to pull that data across so you can basically start working with the data, from QuickBooks, from Salesforce, something like that. And then also web services. So anything that's a web service that exposes data via the OData protocol is going to be a very easy thing to be able to import. Okay, now when I start working with Power Query in Power BI Desktop, what I want to do is I want to go to the, let's go over here, and you can see that I have this Get Data menu. Now, you can also see as I move back and forth, these are all going to be pretty boring views because we have nothing in our project yet. But let's stick it with relationship view so we can see as we bring tables in. Now, we're going to choose Get Data and Get Data CSV. And that's going to allow me to look at different places, either up in my OneDrive site, or here's just a case on my local hard drive. and we're going to go ahead and pull in the data from this CSV file for customers. Now, when you pull it in, what it's going to do is it's going to give you this option right here. Now, it hasn't done anything other than look at the data, and it's showing you what it's finding inside there. If I clicked on the load button, it would basically just take the data and load it into the data model without me performing any type of transforms on it. If I choose edit, what happens is it brings this up inside of the Power Query window. So once again, just if I make this window a little bit smaller, just to emphasize the fact that you work with these two different windows right here. Let's say that I take the customers, and now I say close and apply. That basically says close this particular window and take the data and load it into the data model for my Power BI desktop project right here. And so now what we can see is that I look at relationship view, there's customers. I look at data view right here, and now there is the data inside. Okay, now let's say that I went a little bit prematurely there and I loaded the data before I did any type of editing inside the query. So I'm going to go back and say edit queries. That's going to bring up the Power Query window, and you're going to see all your Power Query queries over on the left-hand side right here. So now let me maximize this window, start doing a couple things with it. So let's say that first thing I want to do is look at the columns that I have inside here. So I'm going to look at the columns, and I'm going to start adding in only the columns that I need. So let's say that I want the customer name, and in a second I'll combine first name and last name to a single column. But I don't need things like address, work phone. Now, another thing to consider is that you're working with the tabular database model. And so it has a column-based storage mechanism, not a row-based mechanism. So one of the neat things there is if you import state and you have 1 million customers, the way that the column-based approach works is that it only has to load each unique value in one time. And then it uses integers to basically create the relationships to basically reconstruct the actual rows inside there. However, if you pick something like email address, which is guaranteed to be unique for each customer unnecessarily, you're making your data model a lot bigger than it needs to be. Okay, and once again, Power BI Desktop and Power BI is fine to work with very large data sets. 1 million customers, 10 million customers, but you don't want to load data in unnecessarily. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by taking first name, last name. We'll take city, state, zip code. We'll take the gender. We'll take the birth date, first purchase date, last purchase date. We'll go ahead and choose OK. So now that we've done that, let's just do a couple things with Power Query to kind of show you the power. So we've seen the Power Query Editor window already. And now what we'd like to do is get used to working with it. So what you'll find is that in the Power Query window, you have 4 different tabs, and each of the tabs has interesting operations in it that you can apply. And quite often, you select a particular column, or you select multiple columns, and then you basically click on a button in the ribbon to basically start the operation inside there. Now, here's just a couple of things that we can do. Renaming columns, converting column types, formatting columns, reordering columns, replacing column values, expanding related columns, merging, splitting. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples of how we can perform those type of operations. So back here, let's say that I don't want a separate first name and last name. Anytime I list a customer name, it's going to be the first name and last name combined. So I can click on these two, and then I can go through and I can find merge columns here. Note that you can also, once you select a single column or a set of columns, right-clicking will generally kind of give you the same options and maybe make it a little easier because you don't have to look across the different tabs inside there. So I want to merge these columns together. And so when I merge them, I want to put a space in between them, And then what do I want the new column to be named? I want that to be named customer. Let's go ahead, choose OK. And you can see it added that step inside. Okay, also, maybe when I put this out there, I want to have state, then city, then zip code. Let's take gender. And when I show gender on reports, it might say M and F. And let's say management's really slow. They don't know what M and F means, so I need to spell things out for them at my company. Not your company. Your company management is very quick. But what I need to do is I need to go ahead and replace some values inside here. So I can simply add this operation, or what we call a step inside there. And I've done it the first time. Now let's go ahead and do it a second time. And we'll go ahead and switch from M to male inside here. Okay, now as we keep moving along, let's go down here. Let's take birth date, and let's go ahead and change its type. Sometimes you have date time, and you want to make sure you change it to date. Problem with date time is if you're looking for things to match and you have a time element inside there, it throws things off. So quite often, when I only want to look at things in terms of one day as the atomic unit, I want to convert the type to date. Okay, now, another interesting thing about working with Power Query, I'm going to go to the View menu, and there is this formula bar inside here. And so one of the things that you can see is that there's this special language that they use when they have these different queries. Now, typically you're not going to get into an advanced scenario, but if I click on the advanced editor, you can see that there's actually this language, and the language of Power Query is called M, the letter M. And what we'll see going forward, especially when we see SQL Server 2016, and then some of the Power Query features get integrated into that, you're going to see that developers are going to be writing scripts with M. Typically, what we're going to do is we're just going to use this UI. Some people like to use the formula bar, other people don't. But as I've done each of that, it's created these different steps. And if I look over here on the right-hand side, note that once I have the steps, I can simply now move through the steps. And so as I move through here, you can actually retrace what you've done. And each time we have a step inside there, it basically changes the value. Okay, so now that you understand that, let's do something interesting. We have first purchase date and last purchase date. Let's say that I want to figure out whether a customer is a repeat customer or not. And so I'm going to create this rule, which is if the first purchase date is equal to the last purchase date, they're a one-time customer. And if they're different, they're a repeat customer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the transform, I'm going to go to the add column ribbon tab, and I'm going to choose add column. Now what's a little bit strange here is I'm writing a formula in this language, which is the M programming language. So it's going to be a little bit different than what you've seen before. So I'm going to say if, and then down here, I'm going to say if first purchase date equals last purchase date, then I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to have a then, and then I'm just going to put in a string of one-time customer, and then I'm going to put a else, which is going to be a repeat customer inside there. And now let's go ahead, choose OK. So now I have this new column, and I should have named that customer type. But now we have customer type inside there. Now here's what really freaks people out. I used first purchase and last purchase to generate customer type. Can I get rid of those, or do I need them? And most people with a database background say you can't get rid of those, you need those. But what's really neat about Power Query is, let me go ahead, take these two and delete that, and it still works fine because it's going through step by step here. Let's retrace the steps, and once you add a column and it does the calculations, you can go ahead and remove those other columns. So as far as being able to do lots of work with lots of columns, but then throw away what you don't need and only load the necessary data into the data model, gets to be a very important concept. Okay, so now that I've got my customers in there, let me go ahead and go back to close and apply, and that's going to load those inside there. Let me now also go down here and say, let's get some more data. In this case, let's go ahead and get some invoices data. And right away, I'll click on Edit, so we can go to the Edit menu inside here. Here's the invoice date. Just going to check to make sure that it's date, not date time. That looks good. As far as the customer ID, well, we're going to need this for the particular relationship. And for the invoice amount, let's go through here and change the type. And I'm going to change this to fixed decimal, which is generally what you want to use. Now, there's an invoice type, and there's 3 values: in person, online, and mail order. And I could switch out values right here, but I'm going to wait till a little bit later in the demo to show you, another way that you could switch the values into something that makes a little bit more sense. Okay, so let's go ahead, close and apply. And once we've got that in there, you also note that when it loaded this inside, it also created a relationship. Now, the reason for that, if I go to Options and Settings, and now we look at options inside here, one of the things that we're going to find as we're working with this is that there is an option to automatically create your relationships for you. I think that was actually the wrong place to go. Let me try one more time to go to Data Source Settings. That's not right there. Okay, somewhere in there, I'm sorry I couldn't find it, there is an option that you can tell Power Query, when you add a new table, if you discover that an existing table and another table both have the same ID, to automatically create the relationship. If I double click on this line, you can see that it automatically created this relationship inside there. If I didn't want the relationship, I could select it and delete it, or I could turn off the behavior and create the relationships myself. Let's go ahead and add one more table inside here. So we have the invoice details table inside, and we'll go ahead and choose Edit on this one. And so when we choose Edit on this one, we've got an ID. Okay, we want that inside there. We want the invoice ID. That's great. We have a quantity. We have sales amount. We have product ID. And now that we have those 3 lookup values to other things right there, we're not looking at products here, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And now that we have that, let's go ahead and close and apply. And once again, we add that inside there. Now, quite often when you're creating a data model, you might want to change things like the names of tables and the names of columns. Let's go back to Edit Query. And let's go back down to Invoice Details. And let's say that for my business users, if we just kind of call this the sales table because it has the lowest granularity of information, and that's actually going to be the rows that we roll up to figure out the amount. Let's go ahead and call this one sales. And once I've done that, we'll go ahead and close and apply inside there. So what you can see is you can make your model easier to digest inside there. Okay, now if I come back over here, we can take a look at what we've done. We've imported the customers table, we've imported the invoices table, we've imported the invoice details table, but we've named it into sales. Okay, now we haven't done any real data modeling yet, but let me go ahead and jump into Report View. I'm going to jump into Report View, and let's go ahead and add a matrix inside there, which is a type of visualization. And then if I look in the customers table, let's go ahead and take the state and add that as a row, and we'll go ahead and add city as a particular column. And then what we can do is we can figure out what our totals are for sales inside here by adding a couple more things into the values. So in our case right here, the things that I care about is under sales. Well, let's go ahead and take the sales amount and put that inside here. And with sales amount, we'll go ahead and make sure that those are numbers that we're summing up. Okay, and then also one more thing that I'll do here is, let's say I want to figure out how many customers. Now we're going to see a better way to do this in a little bit, but at this point I could do something, such as take the customer ID, I could drag that down into values, and then make sure that we have a count distinct on that particular ID. Okay, so what we can see is that we can get our reports up and going. I'm going to go ahead and save my work right here. Okay, so what we just looked at is importing data using Power Query. And what you see is that they give you a user interface that certainly doesn't require a developer, but a more advanced Power user, will be able to move along quickly. Some people will embrace the M programming language. Others will just kind of have that be something that Power Query generates for us behind the scenes. Okay, now the next thing we want to look at is using Power Pivot in Power BI Desktop to begin modeling our data. Okay, so first of all, what are the steps involved? Well, we're going to have to basically look at the tables that we've added into our data model using Power Query and either create the relationships or ensure the relationships are the way we want them. Then we're going to start extending the tables by doing things such as modifying columns, renaming, setting formatting. Note that Power Query can pull data and push it into your data model, but Power Query doesn't allow you to set any formatting characteristics. Power Pivot will allow you to begin to take a column and say, always show this as currency, things like that. Okay, and then the meat of doing the data modeling is creating calculated columns and measures. Okay, now there are a couple nice features that have been supported by Power Pivot inside of Excel with Excel 2013 that are not yet supported in Power BI Desktop, but my expectation is we'll have them over the next few months. And that is creating dimensional hierarchies and creating key performance indicators, what we call KPIs. Okay, now we want to have our table relationships. You've seen that Power BI Desktop and its Power Query features can automatically add the relationships that you want inside there. Note that if I go back and we go to relationship view, and if I had something turned off where it didn't automatically create these, or another case might be, I'm going to go ahead and delete this right here just to show you how easy it is to recreate it. Even if you have the feature turned on to automatically create these, if you're pulling things in from a CSV file and you want to have a relationship between two different columns that don't have the same name, you're going to have to create those manually. So what we're able to do is basically drag and drop these fields on top of one another. Now the UI doesn't show you which particular fields, so you can always double click on the relationship itself, to get more information inside there. Now, a couple things about working with relationships. So the tabular model supports one-to-many relationships, and that's the most common type. It also supports one-to-one relationships. It does not support many-to-many relationships, so generally you have to create some type of a table in between the two tables with the many-to-many relationship. Also, another thing that's not supported in the tabular model is having two different relationships between two different columns and two tables. So for instance, you can't have both the date and the product category define two different relationships. So the trick to doing that is to create a calculated column that has information from both columns and then to create the relationship on that column. Now, the lion's share of the work that we do when we model the data is to create calculated columns and measures. So once again, tables can contain three different types of fields. Currently, if I look at the data view and I kind of look over to authoring, these columns are all just native columns. We haven't introduced any calculated columns or any measures yet. But also, when we go into view mode, report view, and now you're looking at the data set as a consumer, it's going to show all three types of fields in each particular table. Okay, so now that we've seen that, let's go ahead and start by creating some calculated columns inside. So I want to create a new calculated column. let's go back, and once again, you got to go to Data View. Then you go to the particular table that you care about. So for our case right here, let's say that I have this invoice type, but what I'd like to do is create something that's a little bit easier for users to deal with. So I can click on New Column. When you click on New Column, it then introduces something into this formula bar right here. And so first thing we have to do is type in the name of the calculated column, which is going to be purchase type inside here. Now, quite often, we need to have multiple lines. So note that over on the right-hand side, I can make this larger inside. Now, my own personal approach is to use many different lines. Now, here's a switch expression. And I want to basically look at a switch expression. And what do I want to look at? I want to look at the invoice type. So now that we have that inside there, now what we can do is we can say, if it's this value, I want to go ahead and have the output of this column be this value right here, store purchases. So now that we have the first one inside here, let's see if I can kind of quickly copy these inside there. You can tell that I'm a very lazy person with all my copying. And so now that we've closed this up, let's go ahead and change this one to mail order. And once again, what I'm trying to do here is to make better looking labels that are going to be shown on reports. So mail order purchases, and spelling's important here. And then finally we have online. And once I've got this inside here, and now we're going to have our online purchases, I'll hit enter. And I hit enter, and after a second, it should basically come back with that particular value. There's the purchase type. Maybe I can look all the way through here just to make sure all the values are coming across in a nice way. Okay, and now once we've done that, let's go back here, and we can go ahead and change things inside here. For instance, we have city and state, and let's say that we're just looking at sales amount, at this particular time right here, and maybe we want to go ahead and have a column label. So because I've created purchase type inside here, we'll go ahead and drag that into column labels. And what that's going to do, is give me the ability to add things inside there and now kind of look at the data in a different fashion. Okay, now back to the slides. That's how to create a calculated column. Now, you're going to have to decide between calculated columns and measures. One thing I need to point out is if you have worked with Excel and Power Pivot, they call them calculated fields, not measures. So the whole BI world, especially multi-dimensional databases, call these things measures. And then for one version of Power Pivot in Excel 2013, they decided to call them calculated fields. So we had calculated columns and calculated fields, and now we're back to measures. So why are measures a better choice than calculated columns? Well, generally you should prefer measures because they're going to look at various parts of the report and see if there's filtering involved. So measures are calculated at runtime and can take the filtering context into account. Calculated columns are always generated or evaluated when data is loaded in. So there's nothing you can do in a query that's going to change the value of a calculated column. So in general, we should use a measure unless one of these cases is true. So now what I want to do is kind of go down these bulleted points down below here. So we want to create a calculated column to generate headers for row labels and column labels, kind of like I did in that last. If you need to have some type of a filtering effect inside there. Maybe you want to define an expression that's strictly bound to the current row. So if you have things in a row like we did in this case right here, where you can figure out what the value of purchase type is just by looking at other information in the same row. It might make sense there. And then sometimes you want to categorize values and do that during load time. Okay, now let's do this demo right here. I have something about the customer, and if I go look at the customer right here, note that we have a customer birthday. Okay, let's go ahead and reformat that. So I'll go ahead, and when I show the birthday, I want to show this. But really what I'd like to do is I'd like to figure out the customer's age. So we're going to click on New Calculated Column. Once we've created this new calculated column, this is going to be the customer age inside there. Now, one of the things that we can do is we can take today's date, and today is a DAX function, and from that we're going to subtract the birth date. Now, the way that things work internally is that every day is represented by an integer value. And so if you take something like January 1st of this year and January 1st of next year and subtract them, you're going to get 365. So if I divide by 365, you know, what you're going to see here is that that's going to give us a value. And in our case right here, as I did that division, I did not do that correctly. What I should have done is this right here. So it basically does the subtraction, then the division. Okay, one more time, we'll go ahead and run that. And now you get these numbers. Now, after you were 5, you stop saying, I'm 5.5. Rarely do you hear people saying, I'm 55.5. So what we want to do is we want to round this down. And so one of the ways that we could do that is we could call upon the floor function. And with the floor function, I pass a particular value, and then I basically give it the integer value of what I want to round to, whether it's 1 or 10 or 100. And we'll go ahead and choose OK. OK, and so now we have the age of the particular customer. Now let's go ahead and add one more column. And this column is going to be the age group. And so here, because I don't want to type all this stuff in, I'm going to use a little cheater file. So let's go back here. Let's grab this particular value. Let's now go ahead and add it back inside here. But what you can see, I'm using this special trick where if you say switch, you have to put a single value there. And there's this trick that a lot of us use, and that is if you say switch true, and then you put a bunch of statements inside here, well, the age is over 65, the age is over 50. The first one that's true is going to be the return value. So what we can now do is we can basically bucket these age groups inside here. And now we've taken every customer and put them in a specific age group. Now, once I've done that, you know, let's go back over here. You know, let's go ahead and take the report that we're working with. Let's go ahead and add a new slicer visualization. And so I'll go down to customer, and we'll take the age group, and we'll add that in place right here. And so now look at the effect of simply going down here, running that, and rerunning these queries, you know, just based on the customer age group inside there. Okay, so back to the slides. You know, what was the key point right here is that we used a calculated column to take some value and start putting it in buckets, you know, or in various categories. Calculated columns generally are going to show up as row labels or column labels, or we use them in slicers inside there. Okay, now what we'll create far more often is measures. And measures are defined with DAX expressions, you know, just like they are defined. Now, the first thing that you're going to see about measures is they have a big benefit over calculated columns. Calculated columns, you know, can be aggregated in a visual. Let's go back here and kind of take a look at, well, I've got this calculated column inside here, and if I go down here and I kind of take a look at that, I can switch back and forth, you know, between some, you know, but I have no control at this level to really control formatting or the name. So what's going to be a better choice is let's now go back into the data view. Let's go back to the particular place, the sales table, and now let's create a new measure. So this time I'm going to create a new measure, and this is going to be called sales revenue, and that's going to equal, and we're just going to basically say sum and sales amount inside there. Also, as you're creating these, realize that a measure gives you the ability to do formatting inside there. So once I've created this particular measure, and down here in sales, I have that selected, one of the things that we're going to be able to do is to basically go do some type of formatting. I want to format this as general currency or US English. And then how many decimal places would I like? In our case, we're going to go with 0 inside. So what you're going to see is that if you're just using a calculated column or a standard column and you're aggregating that, you don't have as much control. However, let's get rid of that. Let's go ahead and now replace that with our sales amount inside here. And what we're going to see is that that was the wrong one. One more time, I'll take sales revenue and we'll add this inside. Okay, so now you can see, and it looks like I've made a mistake. Come on, Ted, get your act together, go back to sales revenue. We do not want United Kingdom. All of a sudden, I've converted dollars to pounds, and I'm twice as rich as I was a few minutes ago. Let's go ahead, add that back, put that back inside, and now you can see that we have a much better approach for doing things inside there. Okay, in this demo, I'm going to end up with one more thing, and that is when I go to report view and you start seeing a particular data set from the perspective of a consumer, you generally want to make it easier to understand. So now let's go back into the relationship view. And so first thing that I want to do is let's go ahead and take all these different columns from the sales table, and I'm going to take each one except for my particular measure that I've created, and I'm going to go ahead and hide those. Now, when we go back here into report view, one thing that we're going to see if you were in the Power BI desktop is it would move this sales up to the top. I might be able to show you that in a little bit, but basically if you hide everything except for the measures, the data model tools anticipate that that is a fact table, not a dimension table, and they move it to the top. Okay. Also, I could go back and continue to hide other things inside here. Okay, now I've shown you a bunch of things inside. Let me go ahead and move from this project to a larger project. So here is another Power BI desktop project. This is one that we actually build out in our PBI 365 training class, and we build it out over about a 2.5-day period. So it's going to have a lot more to it. But now if I look at this particular data model right here, one of the things that you see is quite often tables are nothing except for measures, the ones that we want to do lots of work on. But being able to hide things inside there, gets to be very important. Okay, now let's go ahead, move back to the slides. So when you look at the benefits of measures over calculated columns, well, calculated columns, while they can be aggregated inside of a visual, well, then the work is done in the visual, and if you use that same calculated column in another visual, you have to redo the settings. What's nice about the measure is it defines the name, the aggregation, and the formatting. All the work is done once and can be reused across many different visuals. Also, if you are the author of a data set that other users, maybe not as technically advanced as you, are going to be using your data model, the more you use measures and the more that you hide things that they don't need in the report, the more you've kind of made a foolproof data model for the report designers inside there. Okay, now you saw how to create a measure. You click on New Measure, you go ahead and you add the DAX inside, and then you add the formatting to the measure inside. Okay, just to go through a little bit more here, let's say that we want to take a look at some of these measures inside here. So if I take a look at some of the measures that we've created inside of the sales table, well, there's some simple ones down here. Here is sales revenue. If I want to look at things, something like units sold. But what you're going to find is that they can get a lot more complicated. For instance, let's say that I want to look at something like sales growth in the previous month. So one of the things that I'm trying to point out is that DAX, can be quite complicated, and the more you get into it, the more advanced that you're going to have to become as far as using DAX inside there. So what this is going to do right here, if I look at this formula, well, we want to sum the sales amount, and once we sum the sales amount, we want to subtract the sales amount from last month. So if this month we did $100, last month we did $90, we're basically going to figure out that we made $10 more this month than last month. Well, now we want to divide through by last month so we can see our percentage increase inside here. Now, if I go down here, and let's go ahead and create a new report page. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to start doing some modeling. Note that I also have a calendar table here that I'll talk about in just a second. But let's say that we add a table, and then we want to look at things by month inside here. So that will be one of the values that I have. And then the second thing that we're going to look at here is the sales revenue growth. Okay, now let me make this a little bit larger right here. Okay, so we'll look at the month, and for each month we'll look at its sales revenue. After we look at the sales revenue, we want to look at the sales growth from the previous month that we're going to have inside there. And so what this is going to give us the ability to do, is to give us, some way to kind of look at things. And it's great that sales are going up, but you'll also find that at certain points our sales have kind of stalled out. We want to see different trends inside there. Now, currently, Power BI Desktop and its version of Power Query and Power Pivot do not support KPIs. Okay, but we can do something like this. Here's kind of a poor man's KPI, is I'm just going to have a measure that puts out some text. If the sales growth is 20%, that's great. If it's only 10%, that's okay. If it's 0, if it's less than 0, that is going to be bad inside there. Now we'll come back here. We'll take a look at what's going to happen when we take the sales growth previous month and we go ahead and add that here. What we can see is that we're going to start, getting away, to start putting some type of evaluation on various types of performance inside there. Okay. Also note that, once I have something like this inside here, let's go ahead and take sales revenue. And, let's say that I've just met with my sales guy. And so he's created this chart for me right here. And he's kind of showing me the sales revenue. And he's saying, hey, look how good we are. We're doing great. So I'm going to copy this across. And so instead of looking at sales revenue, let's look at sales growth from the previous month, put that inside there. And now you're going to see, hey, you're not really increasing what we've already had, inside the company right here. If we now want to go a little bit more, I can now look only at specific months inside here. Let's say I just want to look at the last year. If I go to our calendar table and we put year, into the filtering inside here, and now let's just look at 2015 in particular there, you can start seeing, a lot of good information, as far as how we're trending with respect to growth. One last thing I want to talk about for modeling is that quite often we want to have some type of time intelligence. We want to look at values across time, whether it's by day, by month, by year, by quarter. And so we need to have some type of a way to add a table, which we refer to as a calendar table. Some people call it a date table. Some people call it a timetable inside. So let's say that I go back into this right here. Now note that I've already added a timetable inside. But what we have is this really neat characteristic where I can click on New Table. So if you've used Excel 2013 with Power Pivot, this wasn't included. But if I do something, such as add a new table inside, and I call that calendar, let's go back and take a look at this one right here. There is a DAX formula, calendar, and you give it the first date and the start date, and it adds those inside for you. And then you can automatically add calculated columns for the other things inside there. So there's this new, very neat way that we can create our calendar tables inside there. Okay, I went through a lot of stuff real quickly there. One more thing we're going to do before we end up today, and that's to talk about the publishing process. So when it's time for me to publish what I've been doing, what we're able to do is, let's go back here, and let's say after I've done all my work and I'm happy with my reports and whatnot, let's go ahead and first of all save your PBIX file, save your project. Second, click on Publish. I go ahead and click on Publish, and now what's going to happen is it's going to take the PBIX file and all of its assets, and it's going to publish that into your personal workspace up in Power BI. Currently, they do not support publishing directly to a group workspace. I hear that that's something that they're working on. But once you've published something, into your personal workspace, there are other ways that you can take it and basically get it into a group workspace, and that's one of the things that we're going to look at tomorrow. But now that we've done the publishing, I should be able to go back here, and what we can see is it published the data set. Remember that since I'm back in the browser, unlike Power BI Desktop, there is no data set modeling work that you can do here. So when you click on the data set, you see a new report. But when I did the publishing, it gave me both the data set and it gave me the one report for my project that had many different pages, including that one that I just created inside here. Okay. Also, if I go into edit mode right here, remember earlier I told you that when you take a table and you hide all the columns except for the measures, it changes the icon and it puts it up to the top. And the idea is that now I have something that's going to be easier for people to use, and the things that they want to measure are up at the top, and the dimension tables that they want to use to slice and dice are down below. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish up here. So what we saw is that Power BI Desktop gives us all the power we need to leverage Power Query and Power Pivot. And it does so by basically just including these features and giving us the ability to use them in a simple desktop application that's free for anyone to use. Okay, once you've published it, well, then you can basically have your reports, and then you still need to go through the process of creating your dashboards and finding some way to deploy the dashboards, and that's one of the things that we're going to look at tomorrow in our final session. One more shameless plug for our Power BI course and data analytics and reporting. Lots of labs, and so if you took this course, we basically go into a lot more detail on Power Query and Power Pivot. We'll cover creating calendar tables, supporting time intelligence. We'll go further into reports, and I think even though you can't create dashboards inside of Power BI Desktop, it's a great thing that we can create reports, because when you're creating reports, what you'll find is you don't know that you need a measure until you start using a particular visual that requires that particular measure. Okay, it's my friend Waldek's birthday all day tomorrow. Isn't that great? Okay, I'm not sure why that showed up inside here. But at this point, we're all done with my presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and look to see what type of questions that we have. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and add those inside. And I'm just going to basically answer all the questions till the queue is empty inside. Okay. What is Power BI Designer as compared to Power BI Desktop? Well, I guess that would be the same thing between Puff Daddy and P. Diddy. Two different names for the same thing. So Power BI Desktop was named Power BI Designer while it was in beta through the spring, and then it was renamed to be Power BI Desktop. Okay, next question. Can the data source be a SharePoint list? Absolutely. And it can be a SharePoint list either on premises or it can be a SharePoint list up in SharePoint Online. You know, both of those are supported. Okay. Is there a web interface for Power BI? So this can be done via the web. Well, you have the Power BI service that basically gives you a very similar reporting environment, but currently Microsoft has nothing to do the data modeling through the browser. So when you do your data modeling, your choices today are to use Power Pivot and Excel, and you can actually go back to Excel 2010 or Excel 2013 or Excel 2016. The two later ones, you know, have Power Pivot built in as part of the installed product. 2010 doesn't. You can use Power BI Desktop, or you can use tools for SQL Server analysis services that basically show up inside of Visual Studio. You know, so those are the three places that we can do modeling for tabular databases that will basically you know, support integration into Power BI. Okay, how does Power BI compare to Tableau? Great question. I think you'd find many different people with very different responses, especially if you ask people on the Tableau or the Power BI product teams. But I also think that Microsoft reacts to things like Tableau that are super popular and tries to, you know, find, you know, what are the best features and to match those particular features. So I think once Microsoft acquired DataZen, and then we started seeing that the dashboard designer began to, you know, have those characteristics, you know, that is a great step forward. Microsoft is a much bigger company, so, you know, Tableau definitely needs to be, you know, paid its respect in the fact that it was one of the first ones. It's very popular. It's very easy to use. Some of the areas where Power BI is going to shine is, you know, having a better cloud-based infrastructure, plugging into a much wider array of different data sources, you know, including, you know, QuickBooks, Salesforce, and things like that. Other than that, you know, because I've used Power BI 50 times more than I've used Tableau, I can't go into much more. I think that would be a great debate for two people who are experts in each one, you know, going back and forth. Okay, for the percentage of month-over-month change, is it possible to add a small up and down arrow based on a value or a dot or a stoplight indicator? Great question, Tony. And the answer is absolutely, you can. But the caveat there is, but then you have to create a custom visual, which means you have to be a developer and you're working with JavaScript and TypeScript and the D3 JavaScript library generally. So I would anticipate that Microsoft will kind of have some type of a stoplight metaphor visual sometime soon, but currently there's nothing I've seen that's going to give that for you. Would you add the invoices CSV file to the GitHub repository? Yeah, now that you mention that, David, thank you for pointing that out. There is something that we're going to provide for you in the email that we send out after today. There's going to be some lab instructions how to go through and do something very similar to what I did today. And it will be a single zip file, and the 3 CSV files will all be part of that inside there. Okay, do you have any control over the placement of tabs for additional pages vertically on the left? No, not if you're talking about the reporting infrastructure. You have a tab navigation down along the bottom, and there's really no way that that can be changed. Can we get a screencast of this session? Absolutely. Recordings are going to be available, and a follow-up email will do that. We'll tell you about that. Does Power BI support VB script macros to create custom functions? And the answer is to that, no. And there's nothing in there that's I've seen that will support VB script. If you create a custom visual, and your custom visual is what you ever create with JavaScript and TypeScript, you can have any type of custom logic inside there to do, custom functions, take values from the underlying data source and manipulate them any way you see fit, but not with VB script. What is the cost of the remote training? We have basically training courses. I don't want to give you a price off the top of my head because I'm not sure I'll give you the right price. But the remote training and the in-person training, it's the same class. We've worked for about 2 years now doing remote training classes, and I think we've got to a point where the remote folks feel like they are part of the class. One nice thing about it is that when we have remote students, there is a machine in my classroom that they log into, and as they're working, I can see their mouse move on the screen. I can take control, so the experience of me helping a remote student during the lab is the exact same, as if they were in the room inside there. Okay. How can Power BI benefit K-12 students? Well, I generally find that high school students are going to adopt to this much faster than we do, just because they're so computer savvy. They might not have the business acumen to really, know what to measure and what to look for. But as far as the mechanics, what type of things, could we build? And pretty much anything that we can do in business, we could have, something where we're looking at grades, we're looking at all kinds of, volunteer hours, and creating different dashboards to kind of show. That's just a quick brainstorming, but, I'm sure there's lots of different things. Okay, so at this point, I've just been through, they could use public data sets, absolutely. Okay, I know we're a little bit over, but let me go ahead and do one more kind of quick demo here. If I basically jump back over here to our Power BI desktop and we say get data source and we say web, well, now I can point to different pages. So let's say that you have a favorite football team. And in that favorite football team, I'll just go ahead and say, give me the page that has the Patriots roster inside here. So any web page that has an HTML table is a potential data source. Let's now go back here, and now I'm going to take that particular URL. We're going to add that inside there. And so now it's just going to a public website. It's using anonymous access. It's pulling this data back inside here. And now I can start building rosters. And I could basically run 26 queries to bring back the data from each of the particular teams. I could do an append query and put all the players from the NFL, in a single place right here. So this whole idea, that you can find data accessible, on the internet and bring that in. Or if I come down here and get data, there's also ways that you could search for data in OData data sources, and you find things like data sets that are in Wikipedia. So different ways that you could do that. Okay. And I see Tony has mentioned FanDuel support. Okay, I know, Tony. You're one of the 10% that wins every time, aren't you? Anyway, just a little levity there at the end. I hope everyone enjoyed the session today. Since I've been through all the questions, we'll go ahead and break. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and we'll see you back tomorrow for our last session when we'll kind of close everything up talking about dashboards and getting things into production. So thanks everyone very much for attending today.